The salt spray on the glass, the endless groan of the foghorn, the rhythmic sweep of the light across the wild Atlantic. This was my world, my sanctuary. 58 years old, a retired Coast Guard officer, and for the last 10 years, the keeper of the base harbor headlight. It stood on a rugged peninsula near Bar Harbor, Maine, a sentinel against the untamed sea. After decades of service, of search and rescue missions that carved deep lines into my soul, this quiet existence was a balm. I found a profound peace here, a sense of purpose in maintaining that steady beam, a beacon of stability in a chaotic world. The solitude never bothered me. In fact, I craved it, the vastness of the ocean a mirror to my own quiet introspection. Then Michelle arrived, 5 years ago. She was a breath of mainland air, vibrant and charming, with a laugh that echoed against the granite cliffs and made the old lighthouse feel less like a tomb and more like a home. She was from the city, bright and quick-witted, but she'd spoken of seeking simplicity, of finding beauty in the stark, untamed landscape I'd grown to love. I was deeply, irrevocably in love with her. She was younger, full of a restless energy that I, in my quiet way, found captivating. She seemed to embrace the wind-whipped existence, the isolation, the constant roar of the ocean. We spent our evenings by the fire, talking for hours, or simply watching the storms roll in, her hand a warm weight in mine. I truly believed we were building something unique here, a testament to enduring love, a bond forged against the elements themselves. It wasn't long after she moved in that I updated my life insurance policy. It was a substantial one, a carryover from my Coast Guard days, a final provision for whomever I left behind. I added her name without a second thought, a gesture of my complete trust and devotion, a practical protection for her future should anything ever happen to me. She thanked me, her eyes sparkling, pulling me close and murmuring about how thoughtful I always were. It felt right, a natural extension of our commitment, another anchor dropped into the solid ground of our shared life. We had plans, quiet dreams of growing old together, watching countless sunrises paint the sky over the crashing waves. Every morning, I'd wake before her, make coffee, and watch the first light touch the water, a deep gratitude swelling in my chest. This was it, I thought. This was happiness. This was everything I'd ever truly needed. The quiet rhythms of the lighthouse continued, but sometimes, in the quieter moments, I caught a glimpse of something in Michelle's eyes, a flicker of that mainland restlessness she claimed to have left behind. She would talk about trips, about places she wanted to see, and though she always ended by saying how perfect our life was, how much she loved it here, I sensed a subtle undertow. It was like the sea itself, always pulling, always shifting. I dismissed these thoughts, of course. Love makes you blind to a lot of things, or at least, it makes you incredibly good at rationalizing. I told myself it was just her vibrant spirit, her curiosity. She wasn't meant to be entirely still, and I love that about her too. She kept me from becoming too much of a fixture myself, too rooted in the granite and the salt. We had our disagreements, small ones, about mundane things, but they always blew over like squalls, leaving the air clear again. She sometimes mentioned money, not in a demanding way, but just in passing, about how expensive things were, how difficult it was to save. I just reassured her, told her we were comfortable, that we had enough. My pension, the lighthouse keeper's stipend, it was modest but steady. Enough for us, for our simple life. She would nod, smile, and change the subject to something lighter, perhaps a new book she was reading, or a recipe she wanted to try. I never saw it as a red flag, only as a practical concern, a woman looking out for her future, for our future. How could I have been so naive? The signs were there, faint as ghost ships in a fog, but I was too consumed by the light of my love to see them clearly. The days shortened as autumn deepened, painting the maples fiery red before the wind stripped them bare. The storms began to roll in with more frequency, battering the coast, reminding us of the raw power of nature. Michelle often found the wild weather exhilarating, but sometimes I noticed a tension in her, a desire to escape the confines of the old stone tower when the winds howled like banshees. I'd find her staring out at the churning gray, her expression unreadable. I'd put my arm around her, pull her close, tell her it would pass, that we were safe here. She'd lean into me, and I'd feel her sigh, a deep, almost imperceptible release of breath. I thought it was comfort I was providing, a sense of security against the storm. Now, I wonder if it was something else entirely, a different kind of calculation. The air grew colder, the nights longer. We were heading into winter, the season of isolation, and I looked forward to our cozy nights by the fire, our quiet companionship against the raging sea. I loved the feeling of being cut off from the world with her, just us, safe within the circle of the lighthouse beam. Then came the night the world cracked open. It was a nor'easter, one of the fiercest I'd seen in years. The wind shrieked like a living thing, tearing at the old lighthouse, rattling every pane of glass. Rain lashed down, blinding, relentless. The waves crashed against the rocks below with a deafening roar, shaking the very foundations of the tower. I'd been up most of the night, checking the lantern, making sure everything held fast. Around 3 a.m., I came down to make some tea, hoping to catch a few hours of sleep before dawn. Michelle wasn't in bed. I called her name, my voice swallowed by the storm's fury. No answer. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through the warmth of the roaring fire. I searched the small living quarters, the kitchen, the study. Nothing. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew she sometimes liked to stand by the window, watching the storms, but not in this kind of weather, not in the dead of night. I rushed to the main entrance, the heavy wooden door bolted from the inside. Intact. Then I saw it. The window in the small parlor, overlooking the cliff face, was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor, glinting eerily in the dim lamplight. A gust of wind howled through the gaping hole, whipping the curtains like spectral arms. And on the small writing desk, beneath a heavy paperweight, a single, folded note. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the paper damp with spray. Her elegant script, usually so precise, seemed hurried, almost frantic. Asterisk, David, I can't do this anymore. The sea calls to me. Forgive me. I love you. Asterisk, the words blurred before my eyes, meaningless. The sea calls to her? What did that even mean? Despair, cold and absolute, washed over me, drowning out all rational thought. I stumbled to the broken window, peering out into the maelstrom. The waves were a monstrous maw, crashing against the rocks directly below, a maelstrom of white foam and black water. The thought, immediate and terrifying, was that she had somehow slipped, been swept away by the storm, by the very sea she claimed called to her. I spent the next hours in a desperate, futile search, screaming her name into the wind, shining my powerful Coast Guard flashlight into the churning abyss below, my voice hoarse, my heart breaking. Every instinct, every ounce of my training, told me it was hopeless. The Coast Guard arrived at first light, grim-faced, their searchlights cutting through the still raging storm. The local police followed, their questions muted, respectful. They found no body, of course. Only the broken window, the cryptic note, and the undeniable force of the storm as circumstantial evidence. A tragic accident, they concluded, a woman overwhelmed by the power of the sea. I was consumed by grief, by a guilt that gnawed at my insides like a starving beast. I should have been there. I should have stopped her. I should have known. The lighthouse, once my sanctuary, became a tomb, its beam a mournful eye sweeping over an empty sea. The days that followed blurred into a miserable procession of interviews, condolences, and the aching emptiness of the lighthouse. The Coast Guard continued their search for a few more days, but the sea, as I knew too well, rarely gave back its dead. The police, after a thorough but brief investigation, closed the case. Accidental drowning. A tragic loss. My friends from my Coast Guard days visited, offering quiet support, but their words felt hollow against the roaring silence Michelle had left behind. Every corner of the lighthouse held a memory, a ghost. Her scent on a pillow, a book left open on a table, the faint echo of her laughter in the stairwell. I was drowning in my own grief, a different kind of storm, relentless and unforgiving. Then the insurance investigator arrived. His name was Mr. Davies, a lean man with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything without betraying a single emotion. He worked for the company that held my life insurance policy. He was polite, professional, but his questions were precise, probing. He wanted to know about Michelle's background, her family, her friends, her financial situation. I answered patiently, numbly. explaining that she was from the mainland, that her family was estranged, that we lived a simple life. I felt a flicker of annoyance, a defensive instinct. Didn't they understand my pain? Didn't they see I was a broken man? But Davies wasn't swayed by my grief. He listened, he nodded, he took notes. He asked about the note, the exact wording, my reaction. He asked about the broken window, if it was an old window, if it had been forced. He asked about the timing of my poly. Psi update. Each question, though outwardly innocuous, felt like a tiny pinprick, slowly deflating my carefully constructed narrative of tragic loss. I found myself growing agitated, my voice rising. I had nothing to hide. I was the victim here, the one left behind. Davies left after a few days, promising to be in touch. I tried to forget his unsettling questions, to return to my grief, but a seed of unease had been planted. His sharp eyes, the way he lingered on certain details, the almost imperceptible pause when I mentioned Michelle's lack of close family. It gnawed at me. I tried to dismiss it as the cold, clinical nature of insurance work, but the seeds of doubt, once sown, began to sprout. They were small, almost invisible at first, like the first shoots of weeds pushing through solid rock. They were whispers in the back of my mind, questions I didn't want to ask, shadows I didn't want to confront. The lighthouse beam continued its lonely vigil, but for the first time, it felt like it was illuminating a darkness within me, not just the sea outside. Weeks turned into a month, then two. The emptiness of the lighthouse grew heavier, suffocating. I barely ate, barely slept. My world was a monochrome landscape of grief and unanswered questions. Then Mr. Davies returned, unannounced, his face grave. He didn't sit down this time. He just stood there, holding a thick file, and his eyes, usually so sharp, held a trace of something I couldn't quite decipher. Pity, perhaps, or a weary sort of sadness. He started talking, his voice low, steady, and with every word, the ground beneath me began to crumble. He told me about Michelle. Not the Michelle I knew, not the charming, restless woman who had found peace by the sea. He spoke of a different Michelle, a phantom, a meticulously constructed facade. He told me about a string of aliases, used over the years, each one shedding a layer of a past she desperately tried to outrun. He spoke of a history of mounting debt, credit cards maxed out, loans defaulted on, judgments against her name that stretched back years before she ever arrived on my doorstep. He spoke of a recently opened offshore account, funded with a substantial deposit just weeks before the storm, under a name I'd never heard. And then he dropped the final, crushing blow, the one that splintered my soul beyond repair. Michelle hadn't been swept out to sea. She hadn't succumbed to the storm. She had faked her death. Every detail, he explained, had been meticulously staged. The broken window, likely smashed from the inside. The cryptic note, a dramatic flourish designed to reinforce the narrative of a tragic, impulsive drowning. She had slipped away in the chaos of the storm, likely meeting a boat further down the coast, disappearing into the night, leaving me to mourn a ghost. All of it, every lie, every kiss, every shared moment, had been a calculated performance, a grand deception orchestrated to collect the life insurance policy and disappear, to start a new, debt-free life under a new identity. My life, my love, my trust, they were merely instruments in her elaborate escape plan. The world went silent, then roared back to life with a deafening cacophony of betrayal. It was worse than grief, worse than any loss I had ever known. Grief, at least, carried with it the dignity of love. This was a desecration. My heart, which had been broken, was now pulverized. I was cleared of any suspicion, of course. My despair, my obvious devastation, had been genuine. But the betrayal shattered my soul into a million irreparable pieces. The woman I had loved, the woman I had thought was my future, had never existed. She was a figment of my own desperate hope, an illusion built on a foundation of lies. The lighthouse, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a monument to my own colossal foolishness, its beams sweeping not over hope, but over the wreckage of my life. I couldn't stay at the lighthouse. Every creaking floorboard, every gust of wind, every glimpse of the churning sea became a torment, a cruel reminder of her calculated deceit. The peace I had found there was utterly obliterated, replaced by a hollow ache that resonated deep within my bones. I packed a single duffel bag, leaving behind years of my life, years of shared illusions. The Coast Guard arranged for a temporary replacement, and I walked away from the base harbor headlight without looking back, the wail of the foghorn a mournful echo of my shattered heart. The first few months were a blur of numb existence. I moved into a small, rented cottage further inland, away from the constant reminder of the ocean. My former Coast Guard buddies, bless their stubborn hearts, didn't let me wallow entirely. They dragged me out, forced me to talk, or just to sit in silence with them. One of them, an old friend named Tom, recommended a therapist. I was resistant at first, convinced no one could mend what was broken in me, but eventually, I went. It was a slow, painful process, unearthing the layers of grief, anger, and profound humiliation. Learning to distinguish between the love I genuinely felt for the woman I thought she was, and the crushing reality of who she truly was. It was like mourning someone who was still alive, a phantom limb that throbbed with a pain that no one else could see. The news of Michelle's capture came unexpectedly, a brief mention on the local news channel, then a call from Mr. Davies. She'd made a mistake, a critical one. Living a life of constant paranoia, always looking over her shoulder, she'd used an old, familiar alias for a minor transaction, a slip-up that pinged on a financial watch list. She was arrested for insurance fraud and forgery, her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. There was no triumph in the news, no satisfaction. Only a weary sigh, a confirmation of the darkness I had already come to terms with. The justice system would handle her. My healing had to come from within. Slowly, agonizingly, the fog began to lift. The therapy helped me understand that her actions were not a reflection of my worth, but of her own brokenness. My love, though misplaced, had been real. I started to venture out more, finding solace in the small, close-knit community of former Coast Guard friends. They understood the sea, understood loss, and they understood the quiet strength it took to carry on. I learned to breathe again, to look at the sunrise not with gratitude for a shared future, but with a cautious hope for a solitary one. The ache never fully disappeared, but it softened, becoming a scar rather than an open wound. The lighthouse, in my mind, faded from a symbol of betrayal to a distant memory, a chapter closed. It took time, more time than I ever thought possible, but eventually, the sea began to call to me again, not as a place of pain, but as a source of quiet strength. I realized I couldn't escape it. The ocean was in my blood, a part of who I was. But I couldn't return to the lighthouse, not yet, maybe not ever. That chapter was truly closed. Instead, I found a different way to reconnect. I started volunteering for a marine conservation group, based out of a small harbor not far from Bar Harbor. We worked on coastal cleanups, tracked marine wildlife, and advocated for sustainable fishing practices. It was a different kind of purpose, one that focused on protecting the very waters that once symbolized my deepest pain. The work was physical, grounding. Out on the water, feeling the spray on my face, the roll of the waves beneath the boat, I felt a familiar sense of belonging, but without the weight of past memories. I was David Croft, former Coast Guard, now a man dedicated to the health of the ocean, not a heartbroken keeper guarding an empty tower. I met new people, formed new friendships, bonds built on shared values and a love for the natural world. There was no grand romance, no dramatic new beginning, but a quiet resurgence, a steady rebuilding of a life that felt authentic and true. Sometimes, on clear days, I would see the base harbor head light in the distance, a white needle against the blue sky, its lens glinting. It no longer stirred the same wrenching pain. It was just a lighthouse, a beautiful, historic structure, standing firm against the elements. A reminder, perhaps, of resilience, of enduring through storms. My personal tragedy had transformed, not into bitterness, but into a quiet commitment to life, to truth, and to the enduring power of the natural world. I carried my past, yes, a permanent part of my story, but it no longer defined me. The horizon stretched wide before me, boundless and full of possibilities, just like the sea itself. And I, David Croft, was ready to sail into it, one gentle wave at a time.